Welcome back. What I'm about to tell you exists in the spaces between official histories. This is the story the Wasteland doesn't want you to hear. This video covers the lost years, the 50-year gap between 2077 and 2127 that's been systematically erased from every record, every memory, every history book in the Fallout universe. There's a reason ghouls who survived the nuclear war refused to talk about what came after the bombs. A reason the Brotherhood of Steel seals their early records. A reason 3 billion people disappeared from Earth in 50 years and nobody asks where they went. The Great War wasn't the worst thing that happened to humanity. It was just the opening act. Between 2077 and 2127, something tried to consume every conscious mind on the planet, and it nearly succeeded. This is the confession of a ghoul who remembers, the testimony of someone who lived through the years that history forgot, or more accurately, the years history was forced to forget. And if you genuinely enjoy this kind of dark storytelling, consider subscribing and liking the channel, but only if you like the content, because what I'm about to reveal might change how you see the entire Fallout universe forever. The Wasteland has secrets. This is the deepest one. I need to tell you something before my mind forgets again. Before the static takes over, there are 50 years that nobody talks about, 50 years that got erased, and I was there. They call it the lost years now, the ones who even acknowledge they existed. Most people in the Wasteland, they think civilization just picked up around 2127 or so. Settlements formed, the Brotherhood emerged from their bunker, people started rebuilding, clean narrative. Simple. But that's a lie, a deliberate, calculated lie that every survivor agreed to keep. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I'm old enough to remember, old enough to have watched the bombs fall on the 23rd of October, 2077, and somehow stupid enough to still be breathing now, centuries later. I'm what they call a ghoul. My skin looks like leather, left too long in the sun. My memories, though, those are still sharp, sharper than they should be, sharper than I want them to be. Here's what they'll tell you in the history books, the ones the Brotherhood bothered to preserve. October 2077, the world ended in nuclear fire. Most people died immediately. The lucky ones, anyway. The rest of us had to survive what came after. By 2102, you had the first major events people will actually talk about. Richard Gray falling into the Fev vats at Mariposa, the Master being born. That's a comfortable place to start the real story, isn't it? 25 years after the bombs, and suddenly history begins again. But I'm here to tell you about the gap, about what happened in those 25 years that nobody wants you to know about, and more importantly, about what happened in the 25 years after that. The years between 2077 and 2127, where the records just stop, where the terminals go blank, where even ghouls like me, who lived through it, who should remember every excruciating detail, suddenly get real quiet. You want to know why we don't talk about it? Because some things are worse than nuclear war. Let me start with what I remember clearly. The bombs fell on a Saturday morning. I was in my apartment, nowhere near a vault, nowhere near safety. The flash came first, brighter than anything you can imagine. Then the heat, then the shockwave that turned buildings into dust. I should have died. Everyone around me did, but I didn't. I just started changing instead. The first few days were chaos, pure, undiluted chaos. People burning alive in the streets, children crying for parents who were just shadows on the pavement. The sky turned black with ash and stayed that way for months, maybe years. Hard to track time when the sun disappears. But here's the thing nobody tells you about the immediate aftermath. We organized, fast. Survivors found each other. We shared resources. We built shelters from the rubble. In those first few weeks, humanity actually came together. I met others like me, people who weren't dying from the radiation, but changing because of it. Our skin started to rot. Our hair fell out. We could feel ourselves transforming into something that wasn't quite human anymore. But we were still ourselves, still thinking, still hoping. We didn't know the word ghoul yet. That came later. Back then, we were just the ones who survived. By late 2077, we had something resembling communities, pockets of survivors across what used to be California. We traded. We helped each other. There was this woman, Sarah, who'd been a teacher before. She started teaching the kids who'd survived, trying to give them some normalcy. There was Chen, who'd been an engineer. He figured out how to get some of the pre-war tech working again. We had hope, genuine hope. We thought we could rebuild. The Brotherhood of Steel, they left Mariposa Military Base in late October. I didn't know about them then. Nobody did. They kept to themselves, made their way to Lost Hills, and locked the doors. Smart move, in retrospect. They missed what came next. It started around 2079, 2 years after the bombs. The first sign was the silence. See, in those first 2 years, you could still hear survivors in the distance. Radios occasionally crackled with voices from other settlements. Then, over the span of a few months, those voices started disappearing, one by one. Stations going offline, towns going dark. We sent scouts to check on the settlement west of us. Place called Riverside Camp. 40 people lived there, good people. When our scouts arrived, they found the place empty, not abandoned, empty. Food still on tables, fires still smoldering, but every single person was gone. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle, just gone. It happened to another settlement 3 weeks later, then another. By 2080, people were terrified. We doubled our guards. We set up watchtowers. We armed ourselves with whatever we could scavenge. Didn't matter. The disappearances continued. Then the first one came back. His name was Marcus. He'd been part of a caravan that vanished between settlements. We'd assumed he was dead like the others. Then one night, he just walked into our camp, naked, covered in some kind of slime. His eyes were different, vacant. When we asked him what happened, where he'd been, he just stared at us and started screaming. Not words, just screaming. He screamed for 6 hours straight before his throat gave out. Then he died. We burned his body, didn't know what else to do. But 3 days later, Sarah got sick, started showing the same symptoms, the vacant stare, then the screaming. We quarantined her, tried to help her, but there was nothing we could do. She died screaming too. Then Chen got it, then others. Whatever Marcus had brought back with him, it was spreading. By the end of 2080, half our settlement was dead. The other half scattered. I ran north, joined up with another group of survivors, told them what happened. They'd seen it too. Different settlement, same story. People vanishing, people coming back changed, people dying in waves. This is where the timeline starts to get fuzzy, not because I don't remember, but because what I remember doesn't make sense. The years between 2081 and 2097 blur together in my mind like a fever dream. I have flashes, moments of clarity surrounded by darkness, and I'm not the only one. Every ghoul from that era, when you press them, they all have the same problem. Gaps in their memory, specific gaps, and the memories that remain are fragmented, contradictory, impossible. I remember a green sky, not the black of ash or the gray of nuclear winter. Green, luminescent green that hurt to look at. I remember people changing, not into ghouls, into something else. Something with too many limbs, too many mouths. I remember screaming that lasted for days. I remember a settlement where everyone had stopped moving, but their eyes still tracked you when you passed. I remember machines walking through the ruins, hunting, but these memories don't connect. They float in my mind like islands, and when I try to swim between them, I drown. Here's what I know for certain. By 2097, there were significantly fewer people alive than there should have been. The math doesn't work, even accounting for radiation, starvation, disease, violence. The population numbers were wrong. Millions of people survived the initial bombs. They should have produced a generation of survivors. Where are they? Where are the people born between 2078 and 2100? They don't exist. Not in any significant number. Something killed them, something specific, something that targeted that generation. The Brotherhood of Steel, emerged from Lost Hills in the 2080 seconds and started making contact with the outside world, but their records from that period are sealed. Even their most detailed histories skip from 2077 to the 2130 seconds, with barely a footnote in between. I tried to ask a paladin once, old guy who'd been in the Brotherhood since the early days. Asked him what they saw when they first ventured out from Lost Hills in 2084. He looked at me with this expression I can't describe. Not fear, not sadness, something else. Then he said, "We saw that we'd waited too long," and he never spoke to me again. The Vault experiments. Everyone knows Vault Tech ran experiments on the people they'd sealed underground. But here's what they don't tell you. Most of those experiments ended in the 2090 seconds. Mass failures. Entire vaults opening to find everyone dead, or worse than dead. Vault 12 inches Necropolis that opened in 2097. Everyone inside had turned into ghouls because the vault door was designed to not seal properly, but that was one of the success stories. That vault was supposed to fail slowly. There were others designed to fail quickly, brutally, and they all seemed to trigger around the same time. Between 2090 and 2110, dozens of vaults just opened, dumped their dead or dying into the wasteland, or released things that had stopped being human. I was near Vault 34 when it opened in 2093. The people who came out, they weren't right. They'd been exposed to intense radiation for years due to a reactor leak Vault Tech had deliberately engineered. But it wasn't just the radiation that had changed them. They moved wrong, twitched. Their eyes reflected light, like animals, and they were hungry. Not for food. They started attacking other survivors, eating them, not feral ghouls, something else, something new. We put them down, had to. But the question haunted me then and haunts me now. How many other vaults opened like that? How many released their horrors into the wasteland during those years? And why all at once? Why that specific 20-year window, unless someone was controlling it? Unless someone had planned for all these experiments to culminate in a specific time frame? Unless Vault Tech's AI network had activated and decided to accelerate the failures? There's a theory among the older ghouls, the ones who remember, even if they won't talk about it directly. The theory is that something came through during the chaos, something from outside. When you crack the world open with nuclear fire, you don't just release radiation, you tear holes in reality itself. And sometimes, things slip through those holes, things that shouldn't exist, things that hunger. I saw things in the 2090 seconds that I still can't explain. Creatures that defied biology, structures that appeared overnight in places that had been empty, whole settlements that phased in and out of existence. I watched a man walk into a building and come out 30 years older in the span of 5 minutes. I saw radiation form patterns too perfect to be natural, geometric shapes that hummed with intelligence. The Deathclaws. Everyone knows about Deathclaws now. Terrible creatures, lizard-like things with claws that can tear through power armor. The official story is that they were pre-war military experiments, genetic engineering projects that escaped during the bombs. But I remember when the first ones appeared. It was 2094. Before that, there were no Deathclaws. Zero. The Wasteland had rad scorpions, had bloatflies, had all manner of mutated creatures. But no Deathclaws. Then suddenly, in 2094, they were everywhere, fully formed, hunting in packs, like they'd always been there, but they hadn't. I'm certain of it. And they weren't the only species that suddenly appeared. The radroaches, the giant ants, the mole rats, they all underwent rapid evolution in the mid-2090 seconds. Too rapid. Evolution doesn't work that fast. Something accelerated it. Something forced these creatures to adapt at an impossible rate. Some external pressure or influence that we couldn't see, but that changed the fundamental nature of life in the wasteland. By 2100, I'd stopped trying to understand. I just survived, day by day, avoiding the dead zones where reality seemed to break down, avoiding the creatures that shouldn't exist, avoiding other survivors who'd started acting strange, keeping my head down and my mouth shut, because by then, I'd figured out the truth. The people who tried to document what was happening, who tried to keep records, who tried to warn others, they disappeared. Not killed, not eaten, just erased, like they'd never existed. I learned to recognize the patterns, the signs that someone was about to be erased. They'd start talking about the specifics, not vague memories, not general feelings, but concrete details, dates, locations, names of the things we saw, and within days, sometimes hours, they'd be gone, not dead, gone. Their belongings would still be there, but nobody would remember them. I'd find myself looking at an empty bedroll and knowing, somehow, that someone had slept there, but unable to recall who. So I stayed quiet. We all did. The survivors who made it past 2,105, we'd figured out the rules. Don't document, don't specify, don't try to piece it together, just survive and forget. Actively forget. Force the memories down into the dark parts of your brain where they can't surface, because something was listening, something was watching, and it did not want the truth preserved. Richard Gray became the master in 2102. That's documented history. He fell into the FEV vats at Mariposa, spent months mutating, and emerged as something new. But here's what the records don't tell you. Gray wasn't the first to discover the FEV. Mariposa had been abandoned since October 2077, when Captain Maxon led his people out. 25 years of sitting there, untouched. But I know for a fact that wasn't true, because I saw people going in and out of that base in the 2080 seconds. I was scavenging near Mariposa in 2087, dangerous area, but I was desperate, and I saw them. Groups of people, organized, wearing makeshift hazard suits, entering that base. They'd go in at dawn and come out at dusk, carrying containers. I watched for 3 days from a distance, never got close enough to see their faces, but they weren't military, weren't brotherhood. They moved like scientists, like they knew what they were looking for. I never went near that base after that. Something about the way they moved, the precision of it, told me they were doing something deliberate, something they didn't want witnesses for. When Gray's expedition stumbled on Mariposa in 2102, I remember thinking, he wasn't the first. He was just the first that survived to tell about it, or the first they allowed to survive. The Master created his super mutant army, started dipping people in FEV, building his unity. That's the official narrative. But super mutants existed before 2102. I saw them, not many, not organized, but they were there. In 2095, I encountered 3 of them in the ruins of what used to be Sacramento. They were confused, aggressive, speaking in broken sentences. They kept saying something about the green death and the first dipping. When I asked them where they came from, they got agitated. One of them grabbed me, lifted me up, looked me in the eyes and said, "We were the test. The Master is the product." Then they left, just walked away into the wastes. I never saw them again, but their words stuck with me. The test. If the Master was the product, then someone had been experimenting with FEV before Gray ever got there. Someone had already created super mutants. The Unity wasn't the first attempt. It was the second, or the 10th, or the 100th. The really terrifying thing about the lost years is how complete the erasure is. I've broken into pre-war terminals that survived the bombs, military installations, corporate headquarters, government bunkers. These machines recorded everything, obsessively, every detail, and they keep recording after the bombs. Automated logs, environmental sensors, security cameras. The data is there for October 2077. It's there for November 2077, December. Then it starts to degrade. Not mechanically. The terminals still work, but the logs become corrupted, fragmented. By 2080, most terminals show nothing but error codes for years at a time. Then around 2130, they start recording normally again. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. The corruption isn't random. I've examined hundreds of terminals. The corruption follows patterns. Specific dates are always missing. Specific keywords trigger the errors. Names of places that no longer exist. references to events that nobody remembers. It's not decay, it's not radiation damage. It's deliberate data destruction. Someone or something went through every functioning terminal in the Wasteland and scrubbed specific information. The Brotherhood has the most complete archives. They preserved everything they could from the pre-war era. Their scribes are meticulous, but even their records have gaps. I snuck into Lost Hills once, years ago, before their security got too tight, found the restricted archives, the files that only elders can access, and there, buried in the classified section, was a folder labeled Unrecorded Period, 2077 to 2127. Inside were reports from Brotherhood Paladins, dated to the early 2132, describing their first major expeditions into the Wasteland. The reports were horrifying, not because of what they described, but because of what they refused to describe. Every report had the same structure. We found Settlement X at coordinates Y, population 0, evidence of organized departure, no signs of struggle, no remains, recommend area be classified as dark zone and avoided indefinitely. Page after page of settlements, hundreds of them, all empty, all abandoned in the same mysterious way. But there was one report, stuffed in the back, that was different, written by a paladin named Kendricks. He'd found something the others hadn't. In the ruins of what used to be Fresno, he'd discovered a bunker that had been sealed from the inside. When they broke in, they found 53 bodies, men, women, children, all dead, but not from violence, not from starvation. The report said they died of catastrophic cellular decay. Their bodies had simply started breaking down at the molecular level while they were still alive. And on the wall, written in blood, was a message. It came from the green sky. It wore our faces. It knew our names. Sealing ourselves in was the only way to stop it from using us. If you're reading this, check your reflection. Make sure it's still yours. The report was marked to be destroyed upon reading by order of High Elder Maxon. But someone, Kendricks maybe, or another scribe, had kept it, hidden it in the archives instead of destroying it. A tiny act of rebellion, a refusal to let the truth be completely erased. I tried to find Paladin Kendricks years later, wanted to ask him what he'd really seen in that bunker, what he'd felt, whether he checked his reflection afterward. The Brotherhood told me he died on a patrol in 2136, heroic death, fighting raiders, but they couldn't show me his body, couldn't show me a grave, couldn't show me any evidence he'd ever existed except that one report. Make of that what you will. The ghouls are the key to understanding the lost years. We lived through them, we remember, but we've made a choice, collectively, to stay silent. I've met ghouls older than me, pre-war survivors who remember the bombs falling, who remember the world before, and when I try to talk to them about the years between 2077 and 2127, they shut down. Some get angry, some get scared, some just go quiet and walk away. But one of them, an old ghoul named Desmond, he'd been some kind of intelligence agent before the war. He told me something I've never forgotten. Kid, he said, using kid ironically, since I was already over a century old at that point. There are things worse than death, worse than torture, worse than watching everyone you love die. There's knowing something that, if you speak it aloud, will unravel reality itself. The lost years aren't lost, they're buried, and some graves should stay closed. I asked him if he was afraid of being erased like the others. He laughed, said, "I'm afraid of what happens if we're not erased. If the truth gets out, if people start digging, because whatever happened during those years, it had rules, it had limits, and the price of our survival was agreeing never to test those limits." Then he did something strange. He pulled out an old piece of paper, yellowed and fragile, and handed it to me. On it was a list of dates, 12 specific dates between 2077 and 2127. Next to each date was a number. starting at global population 7 billion and decreasing. By the final date, 2127, the number was 300 million. He said, "Those are census estimates, based on vault records, Brotherhood surveys, and pre-war projections. In 50 years, humanity went from 7 billion to 300 million. Nuclear war killed maybe 2 billion immediately. Radiation, starvation, and violence killed maybe another billion over the first decade. That still leaves 3 billion unaccounted for. Where did they go?" I couldn't answer. Still can't. 3 billion people don't just vanish, but they did. Between 2077 and 2127, the human race experienced a die-off that makes the nuclear war look like a minor setback. And nobody talks about it. No faction, no historian, no survivor. We all just pretend that the slow rebuilding from 2127 onward was natural, was expected, was the logical outcome of nuclear war. But it wasn't. Something else happened. Something that killed 3 billion people over 50 years and left so few survivors that even the major factions could barely scrape together enough people to function. The Brotherhood of Steel, mighty as they became, started with maybe 200 people. The NCR, the largest nation in the Wasteland, grew from a single small vault. The Enclave, the remnants of the actual US government, with all their resources and preparation, were down to a few thousand people. Everybody was on the edge of extinction, and nobody asked why. The mutated animals. I need to talk about them because they're evidence of something wrong with the timeline. The rad scorpions, for instance. Scorpions exposed to radiation don't get bigger. They die. Radiation causes cancer, causes cellular breakdown, causes death. It doesn't create functional, reproducing populations of giant creatures. That's not how biology works. But every scientist in the Wasteland just accepts that radiation did this. They don't question it. They don't research it. They just accept the impossible as normal. But I remember when the rad scorpions first appeared. It was 2093. Before that, we had regular scorpions, maybe slightly bigger from mutation, but nothing like the house-sized monstrosities we have now. Then, over the course of maybe 6 months, they were everywhere, fully adapted to the Wasteland, hunting in coordinated groups, reproducing successfully. Evolution doesn't work that way. Not in 6 months, not in 6,000 years. Something changed them. Something forced them to evolve in a specific direction. And it wasn't just the scorpions. Every major mutant species appeared in that same window, 2093 to 2097. Rad roaches, giant ants, giant mantises, mole rats, Brahmin with 2 heads, death claws, all of them. The Wasteland went from being a dead zone with scattered regular animals to an ecosystem of nightmare creatures in less than 5 years. That's not natural. That's not radiation. That's engineering, or something worse. Something that can rewrite biology across an entire continent simultaneously. I found a research facility in 2099, pre-war biotech company, the kind that was working on genetic modification before the bombs. I broke in looking for medical supplies. Found something else instead. Lab notes from after the war, dated 2095. The scientists had survived, sealed themselves in their lab, kept working. They'd been studying the mutated creatures appearing in the Wasteland, and according to their notes, the mutations weren't random. They followed a template, a genetic blueprint that was being imposed on the local wildlife. The notes said, "The mutation vector is not radiological, it is informational. Something is teaching the local genome how to reshape itself. The radiation is merely a catalyst, providing the energy for rapid change. But the direction of change is being guided by an external intelligence or process. We do not understand the mechanism, we do not understand the source. But the pattern is undeniable. Something is terraforming Earth's biology to match a specific design." The notes ended abruptly. The last entry said, "It's inside the lab. Don't let it touch you. Don't let it," and then nothing. I searched the facility, found 12 bodies. The scientists, they died at their workstations. No violence, no struggle. They just stopped. Their bodies showed signs of that same catastrophic cellular decay from the bunker in Fresno. Like something had reached inside them and turned off their ability to hold together as coherent organisms. I burned those notes, burned the facility, set the whole thing ablaze and ran. Because reading those words, I felt something watching me, felt something notice that I understood. And I knew, bone deep, that understanding was dangerous, that curiosity was lethal, that some questions answer themselves by killing the one who asks, the Enclave, the shadow government that survived the war. They know, I'm certain of it. They have records that nobody else has, access to data that got erased from everywhere else. But they're not talking either. In fact, they're more committed to keeping the secret than anyone. The Brotherhood at least acknowledges gaps in their knowledge. The Enclave pretends those gaps don't exist. I met an Enclave deserter once. This was decades later, after their oil rig got destroyed. He was dying, radiation poisoning finally catching up to him. I gave him water, made him comfortable. In his last hours, he got delirious, started talking about the protocols, said the Enclave had sealed orders that activated in 2090. Orders from before the war. Instructions for what to do if the contamination spread beyond acceptable parameters. He said the Enclave spent the entire 2090 seconds not trying to rebuild America, but trying to contain something, fighting a war against an enemy they couldn't name, losing badly. He said they called it the unification event, said it was trying to merge everything into a single consciousness. Human, animal, plant, machine, all of it. Breaking down the barriers between distinct entities, creating oneness through force. And it was working, slowly, settlement by settlement. The Enclave had protocols for identifying contaminated areas, for quarantining them, for sterilizing them if necessary. He said they burned entire settlements to stop the spread, killed thousands of survivors to save millions, and in the end, around 2105, it just stopped. The unification event ceased, retreated, went dormant. The Enclave never found out why. They just knew it was gone. And they were so relieved they didn't question it, didn't investigate, just sealed all the records and pretended it never happened, focused on rebuilding, on restoring America, on their plans for purging mutants, anything to avoid thinking about those 15 years when they fought something they didn't understand and somehow survived. What do you think really happened here? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd like to know if I'm the only one who feels this way. The year 2105 is when things changed. When the pressure released, I felt it. Every ghoul I've talked to felt it, like a weight lifting off the world, like we could breathe again. After holding our breath for decades, the disappearances stopped. The reality distortions faded. The impossible creatures stopped appearing. The wasteland settled into a new normal, still deadly, still irradiated, still full of mutants and raiders and horror, but comprehensible horror, human-scale horror, not whatever had been happening before. Settlements started lasting. People born in 2105 onward actually survived to adulthood. Trade routes established, factions solidified. The Brotherhood came out of hiding. The NCR's foundations were laid. The Enclave started their schemes. Super mutants from the Master's army dispersed into organized groups. Civilization, broken and mutated but still civilization, began again. And everyone, every faction, every survivor, every ghoul, we all made the same unspoken agreement. We don't talk about 2077 to 2105. We don't ask questions. We don't investigate. We accept the official story. Nuclear war was bad. Radiation was bad. Survival was hard. We leave it at that. Because whatever the truth is, knowing it would be worse than ignorance. By 2110, the Wasteland had established what I call the conspiracy of silence. It wasn't organized. Nobody held meetings or made official declarations. It just happened organically. Survivors realized that talking about the lost years brought attention, bad attention, so they stopped. Parents didn't tell their children. Ghouls didn't tell the younger generations. Records stayed sealed. Questions went unasked. But the evidence remained. Physical evidence. Structures that shouldn't exist. Craters that don't match nuclear blast patterns. Mass graves with bodies arranged in geometric patterns. Entire cities where every building is marked with the same symbol. A symbol that doesn't appear in any pre-war or post-war database. The Wasteland is littered with proof that something happened. You just have to know where to look. And more importantly, you have to be willing to see it. I've spent decades cataloging these sites. Quietly, never writing anything down, just memorizing locations. There's a place south of what used to be Bakersfield. Underground chamber, had to dig through 30 feet of fused glass to reach it. Inside, I found a room full of bodies. 247 of them, I counted, all sitting in chairs, arranged in concentric circles, all facing inward toward a central pillar made of some kind of crystalline material. The bodies showed no signs of trauma. They just sat down and died, or stopped. Hard to tell the difference. The crystalline pillar was still humming, emitting a frequency just at the edge of hearing. And when I got too close, I started seeing things, flashes of other places. Other times, I saw that room full of people alive, sitting there willingly, staring at the pillar with expressions of rapture. I saw something flowing from them into the pillar, something invisible but tangible, like they were being drained of whatever makes a person a person. And I saw the pillar growing, spreading, reaching out through the ground toward other settlements. I smashed that pillar with a sledgehammer. Took me 6 hours. It was harder than diamond, but I kept hitting it until it cracked, until the humming stopped, until the visions faded. Then I sealed that chamber, and I've never gone back. But I know there are others. I've felt that same humming in other locations. That same just at the edge of hearing frequency that makes your teeth ache and your thoughts go strange. The Institute, they're a newer faction, Commonwealth-based, scientific enclave, working from beneath the ruins of MIT. They've been active since at least 2110, though they didn't become widely known until much later. And they know something. Their scientists, the ones who built their underground facility, they found things. Pre-war research that wasn't in any vault, wasn't in any military base. Research that predates the bombs, but describes the post-war world with impossible accuracy. I talked to a synth once, one of their early models that escaped. It was still partly human, augmented rather than fully artificial. And it told me that the Institute's founders had discovered classified files from a project called Continuity. The files described contingency plans for after the nuclear war, not for rebuilding, for managing what came next, for containing the secondary event. The synth didn't know what that meant, but it said the Institute's obsession with creating artificial humans, with replacing surface dwellers with synths, it wasn't about perfecting robotics. It was about creating beings that couldn't be contaminated, that couldn't be touched by whatever had contaminated baseline humanity during the lost years. The synth said they're preparing for it to come back. Everything they do, every experiment, every kidnapping, every replacement, it's all about having a human population that's immune to the unification event when it returns. That was the first time I'd heard someone else use that term, the unification event, the same phrase the Enclave deserter had used. Two separate factions, opposite sides of the continent, both aware of the same phenomenon, both building their entire strategy around preventing its return, both refusing to tell anyone what they were preparing for. The children of Adam, the religious cult that worships radiation. They appeared around 2120. Their theology seems insane at first, worshipping nuclear fire as divine, seeking to bring about division through atomic power. But when you dig into their beliefs, there's something else there. They talk about the time of unification that came before. They say division, separation into distinct beings, is holy because unification is profane. They preach that consciousness should remain separate, that minds should stay isolated in individual bodies, that the natural state of matter is dispersed, not concentrated. It sounds like standard religious mysticism, until you realize they're describing the opposite of what happened during the lost years. They're worshiping division because they remember, on some cultural level, what it was like when division started breaking down, when boundaries between individuals started dissolving. They're not just a radiation cult, they're a trauma response religion, born from survivors who experienced something that threatened the very concept of individual existence. I attended one of their services once, in disguise. The preacher, a ghoul older than me, named Confessor Cromwell. He spoke about the age of merging. He said, before division blessed us with Adam's cleansing fire, there was a time when the self was threatened, when the boundary between I and thou began to fade, when all threatened to become one, and Adam, in his mercy, restored separation through holy radiation. After the service, I approached him, asked him directly what he meant. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much and said, "You already know, brother. You were there. We all were, and we all made the choice to forget. But our faith remembers what we refuse to. The enemy of division nearly won, and only through Adam's continued blessing do we remain separate, distinct, individual. The day the radiation fades completely is the day it returns. The super mutants from the Master's army, the first generation ones, the intelligent ones, they're long-lived like ghouls. Some of them survived from the 2,160 seconds into the present day, and they have their own version of the story. I met one named Marcus, not the same Marcus from my early settlement, but named after him maybe. This Marcus was old, had been with the Master from the beginning. When the Unity fell, he'd gone east, established settlements, tried to build a life for his people. I asked him if the Master had ever talked about what came before Richard Gray became the Master. Marcus got quiet. Then he said, the Master was brilliant, insane, but brilliant. He understood things about the world that nobody else did, and he was terrified. His whole plan, the Unity, creating a race of super mutants to replace humanity, it wasn't just about evolution, it was about survival. He told us, near the end, that baseline humanity was vulnerable, that something had tried to consume us once and failed, but it would try again, and next time it would succeed unless we became something it couldn't digest. I said, the lost years. Marcus nodded. He called it the hunger time, said he'd experienced it himself before falling into the FEV, said that's why he survived the vats when others didn't, because he'd already been touched by it, already been changed, and the FEV gave him the strength to resist, to remain himself, even while transforming. He said regular humans couldn't do that. They'd just dissolve, become part of the mass consciousness, so he needed to make them into something stronger, something that could maintain individual identity, even under extreme pressure to merge. Did he say what it was? This thing that tried to consume humanity? Marcus shook his head. He had theories, changed them constantly. Sometimes he thought it was a weapon, sometimes an alien presence, sometimes a natural phenomenon. Toward the end, he believed it was the planet itself. That Earth had gained consciousness during the nuclear holocaust and was trying to absorb all life into a single planetary mind. That's why he built the cathedral, not just as a base, but as a shield, something to block the planet's awareness. Do you believe that? I don't know what I believe, but I know the Master was right about one thing. Humans aren't safe. We super mutants, we're sterile, can't reproduce. Our species is dying out slowly, but we've never had a single case of what you might call possession. Never had one of us suddenly stop being themselves. Whatever protects super mutants from that, it's real. The FEV did something to us that makes us unpalatable to the hunger. The locations where vault experiments were concentrated. I started mapping them around 2,150. By then, enough time had passed that I felt safe documenting things again. Whatever had been watching during the lost years, it had gone dormant, or left, or been satisfied. I created coded maps, marked the sites of failed vaults, noted the timing of their failures, and I found a pattern. The vaults that failed in the 2090 seconds, they formed a shape. When you plot them on a map, they create a rough circle about 400 miles in diameter, centered on a location in the Sierra Nevada mountains, not Mariposa, something else, deeper. And within that circle, the concentration of disappeared settlements was highest. The reality distortions were strongest. The evidence of the unification event was most prominent. I went there in 2155. Took me 3 months to reach the center of that circle. It's remote, high altitude, difficult terrain. And when I arrived, I found nothing. No base, no vault, no installation, just a valley. Peaceful, quiet, beautiful even, in a wasteland kind of way. But the radiation readings were off. Not high, off, fluctuating in patterns that didn't match any natural source. And the trees, the few scraggly trees that had survived in that valley, they were wrong. Their branches formed geometric shapes. Their roots, when I dug down, were intertwined in complex networks that resembled circuit boards. I camped there for a week, trying to find some evidence of what that place was, why it was the center of the pattern. And on the 7th night, I had a dream. Except it wasn't a dream because I wasn't asleep. I was sitting by my fire, fully conscious, when my perception shifted. Suddenly, I could see the valley as it had been during the lost years. There was a structure, massive, not built but grown, made of something that was part machine, part organism, part something else, entirely. And it was a receiver, an antenna, pulling in signals from somewhere else, somewhere outside. It had activated during the nuclear war, drawn power from the electromagnetic chaos of the bombs, and spent 28 years trying to transform the surrounding area into something compatible with its origin point, trying to prepare Earth for colonization by something that couldn't survive in our normal physics. I saw people walking into that structure, thousands of them, voluntarily, drawn by signals we couldn't consciously perceive, but that spoke to something deep in our biology. They walked in human and came out changed, transformed into relay nodes, living antennas that spread the signal further. And the signal's message was simple: dissolve your boundaries, merge with the network, become one. But it had failed. In 2105, the structure had consumed too much, tried to convert too many people too quickly, overloaded its capacity, and it collapsed, imploded, broke down into subatomic particles, and dispersed. The valley was empty because the structure had erased itself rather than be studied. And in erasing itself, it had released all the absorbed consciousness back into the wasteland. Billions of minds, fragmented and damaged, scattered across the continent like radioactive ash. When my perception snapped back to normal, I was face down on the ground. 3 days had passed. My campfire was cold. I was dehydrated, starving, and my nose was bleeding. I left that valley immediately, never returned, never marked it on any map, because I understood, finally, why we don't talk about the lost years. It's not that we're afraid of being erased, it's that we're afraid of calling it back. The structure is gone, but the signal might still be detectable out there, wherever it came from. And if they know we noticed, if they know we survived and remember, they might try again. The Brotherhood's hidden mission. I cracked it eventually. Took me until 2200, but I figured it out. Their obsession with collecting technology, with preventing others from using advanced pre-war devices. It's not about preventing another nuclear war. That's the cover story. The real reason is they're searching for pieces of the structure, components that survived the collapse, fragments of the antenna that are still active, still transmitting, still trying to complete the unification. Every time the Brotherhood locates a piece of pre-war tech that emits unusual signals, they don't study it, they destroy it, utterly. They've developed protocols specifically for eliminating these artifacts, protocols that involve plasma immersion, electromagnetic scrambling, and finally disposal in areas of intense natural radiation where any residual signal would be masked. They're not preserving technology, they're hunting it, killing it, making sure it can never be reassembled, but they can't tell anyone. Because the more people know about the artifacts, the more people start looking for them, and looking for them, focusing human consciousness on them, that acts as a beacon, that tells the source of the signal that humanity is ready to be contacted again. So the Brotherhood maintains their facade, lets people think they're selfish tech hoarders, takes the hatred and resentment because it's better than the truth. The NCR, the New California Republic, born from Vault 15, grew into the largest organized nation in the Wasteland. They seem like the success story, proof that humanity can rebuild. But their founding is suspicious. Vault 15 opened in 2097, right at the end of the worst period, and its dwellers were unusually organized, unusually cooperative, unusually unified in their vision. They established Shady Sands almost immediately, built trade networks, created currency, formed government. It happened too smoothly, too perfectly. I've always wondered if Vault 15 was a control vault or one of the experiments. The records say it was supposed to test diverse ideological groups living together. But what if the real experiment was deeper? What if Vault Tech knew about the unification event? What if Vault 15 was designed to produce people who'd been partially unified, who'd experienced limited merging of consciousness and survived, who could work together with superhuman efficiency because they'd learned, on some level, to share thoughts? The NCR's expansion was relentless, organized, inevitable, like a hive mind pursuing manifest destiny, and they've never had the internal conflicts you'd expect from a democracy. Sure, there's politics, corruption, bureaucracy, but the core unity of purpose never wavers. The NCR always moves as one, always. That's not how humans normally work, unless they're not entirely human anymore. Unless Vault 15 produced something new, something between individual and collective, and nobody notices because it's subtle, because they're still people, just people who unconsciously share a collective goal that overrides individual ambitions. If you've ever wondered what choice you would make in a situation like this, tell me in the comments. I'll be reading them. The Enclave's genocide plan. Their modified FEV virus designed to kill anyone with mutated DNA. Everyone assumes it was about purity, about preserving pure strain humanity. But what if it was about something else? What if the Enclave discovered that mutated DNA was more susceptible to the unification event, that baseline humans, ironically, were more resistant? Their plan wasn't genocide out of prejudice, it was quarantine procedure. Eliminate the vulnerable population before the hunger returns and uses them as entry points. It's monstrous either way, but it reframes their actions. They weren't monsters who hated mutants. They were monsters who loved baseline humanity enough to kill billions to save it. And when the Chosen One destroyed their base, when the modified FEV was lost, the Enclave didn't just lose their chance to rebuild America. They lost their defense against the next unification event. No wonder they collapsed. They knew what was coming, and they just lost the only weapon that might stop it. The year 2127, the official end of the lost years. The year history starts again. But why that year specifically? What happened in 2127 that made it safe to remember, to document, to build lasting settlements? I've researched this question more than any other, and I have a theory. In 2127, something changed in Earth's magnetosphere. Solar activity. There was a massive solar flare that year, one of the largest on record. It disrupted electromagnetic fields globally. Short term, it was devastating. Long term, it might have saved us. Because if the structure was a receiver, and if it was pulling signals from outside Earth, then disrupting Earth's electromagnetic field would have disrupted the signal, created noise, static, made Earth invisible to whatever was trying to reach it. The solar flare didn't just happen. It was predicted. Pre-war astronomers had calculated it decades in advance, and I think that's why the bombs fell when they did. The 23rd of October 2077, exactly 50 years before the solar flare, someone in the pre-war government knew that in 50 years, Earth would be shielded by natural electromagnetic chaos. knew that if humanity could survive those 50 years, if we could outlast the unification event, we'd be safe or safer for a while. So they triggered the war, deliberately created the conditions for the structure to activate, let it try to consume humanity, knowing it would fail, knowing the solar flare would scramble its signal, sacrificing billions of people to save the species. The ultimate utilitarian calculation, the ultimate atrocity in service of survival. I can't prove any of this. I have fragments, implications, patterns, but proof requires documentation, and documentation attracts attention, and attention is how you get erased. So, I carry this knowledge alone. Well, not alone. Every old ghoul carries some version of it. Every faction leader knows pieces. Every survivor who lived through the lost years has their own theory, but we don't compare notes. We don't collaborate. We stay isolated in our understanding because isolation is survival. If this story has kept you listening this far and you want more of these dark confessions from the Wasteland, hit that subscribe button. It tells me someone out there is still paying attention to warnings like these. The Wasteland is stable now, has been for over a century. The threats are known. Raiders, mutants, radiation, starvation, human-scale problems with human-scale solutions. We've rebuilt, slowly, imperfectly, but we've rebuilt, and every generation that's born, never knowing about the lost years, is a gift. They get to live in a world where the worst thing that ever happened was nuclear war, where the monsters are just mutated animals, where the enemy is just other human. They don't have to know that for 50 years, humanity wasn't alone in its own head, that we shared our minds with something vast and hungry, that we survived not through strength or courage, but through cosmic timing and someone's willingness to murder the world to buy us that time. They get to be innocent, and maybe that's worth the conspiracy of silence. But I'm old now, older than anyone should be, and I can feel my mind starting to fade, not into ferality, but into the static. The same static that took so many during the lost years. I don't have much time left, maybe days, maybe hours, so I'm breaking the silence, recording this testimony, leaving it for whoever finds it, because someone should know, someone should understand what we survived, what we're still surviving. The solar flare's protection won't last forever. Eventually, the magnetosphere will stabilize, the static will clear, and Earth will be visible again to whatever sent the signal. It might be decades, might be centuries, but it will happen, and when it does, the unification event will try again. The hunger will return, and next time, we won't have 50 years warning. We won't have a pre-planned apocalypse to buy us time. We'll just have the scars from last time and the knowledge that we barely survived. That's what the lost years were really about. Not what happened, but what almost happened. Not the people we lost, but the species we almost became. Not the end of the world, but the end of individuality. And the terrifying truth that we didn't win, we just got a reprieve. A temporary stay of execution while the executioner reloads. So what do we do with this knowledge? How do we prepare for something that exists in the spaces between thoughts? You can't fight it with guns, can't hide from it in vaults, can't outrun it or negotiate with it. The only defense is to remain separate, to maintain the boundaries between self and other, to resist the seductive pull of unity. The Institute understood this. Their synths aren't just artificial humans, they're teaching tools, practice for humanity, learning how to coexist with beings that look human, sound human, but aren't connected to the human collective, unconscious. When the signal returns, when the hunger tries to link us all together again, the people who've learned to live alongside truly separate consciousness will have an advantage. They'll understand isolation in a way that might protect them. The Brotherhood's paranoia serves a purpose. By hoarding technology, by keeping people ignorant, they maintain cognitive diversity, different communities with different knowledge bases, different belief systems, different ways of thinking. That diversity is poison to the unification event. It needs homogeneity to spread, needs similar minds to bridge between. The Brotherhood's fragmentation of knowledge isn't cruelty, it's inoculation. Even the raiders, the cannibals, the monsters we call the worst of humanity, They serve a function. They maintain fear. Fear keeps people alert, keeps communities separated, keeps trust low, and low trust means low connectivity, means harder for a mind virus to spread. I'm not saying the horrors of the Wasteland are good. I'm saying they're functional. They're symptoms of an immune response. Humanity's white blood cells attacking anything that tries to create large-scale cooperation. We survived the lost years by fracturing, by breaking apart into tiny, isolated groups that couldn't sustain a unified consciousness, and we've stayed broken ever since. Not because we're incapable of rebuilding properly, but because being broken is what keeps us safe. Every attempt at large-scale organization, every faction that gets too big, too unified, too successful at bringing people together, they hit a ceiling. They self-destruct. Internal conflicts tear them apart. It's not bad luck, it's programming. Humanity has developed an allergy to unity. The question I can't answer is whether this is permanent. Are we stuck like this forever? Capable of small communities but not civilization, able to survive but not thrive? Or is this just temporary, a cultural trauma that will eventually heal? And if we do heal, if we do learn to trust and cooperate and build something truly great again, will that be the trigger? Will large-scale human unity be the beacon that calls the hunger back? I've spent 2 centuries thinking about this, and I've concluded that the answer doesn't matter, because we don't get to choose. We're not rational actors making strategic decisions. We're traumatized survivors doing whatever keeps us alive one more day. The Wasteland isn't going to unify because it can't unify. The scar tissue is too thick, and maybe that's mercy. Maybe broken is better than consumed. There are others like me, old ghouls who remember, who carry the weight of the lost years. We recognize each other without speaking, a certain look in the eyes, a way of holding ourselves, apart even in crowds. We're the keepers of the secret, the guardians of the gap in history, and we're dying out. Every year, fewer of us remain. Natural deaths, finally catching up even to our radiation-extended lifespans. Within another century, maybe 2, we'll all be gone, and the secret will die with us, unless I do this. Unless I break the silence completely, leave a full accounting, risk whatever consequences come from speaking the truth aloud, because I realized something recently, something that changed my mind about the conspiracy of silence. The new generation, the ones born in the 2200 seconds and 2300 seconds, they're different. They don't have the fear, don't have the instinctive revulsion toward unity that we do. They're trying to rebuild civilization properly, forming larger nations, creating trade networks, establishing communication systems. They're doing everything we learned not to do, and they're succeeding. The NCR keeps growing. The Brotherhood keeps finding new chapters. Even raiders are forming into larger gangs, more organized armies. Humanity is healing. The allergy to cooperation is fading. We're becoming capable of large-scale organization again, which means we're becoming vulnerable again. The protection of fragmentation is eroding, and nobody in the younger generations knows why that's dangerous. They see our paranoia, our isolation, our refusal to trust, and they think we're just damaged, just traumatized by the war and the hard years that followed. They don't understand we're damaged for a reason, that our trauma is a survival trait. So I'm speaking up, not to pass on the trauma that would just cripple them, but to pass on the knowledge, to give them the choice we never had. They need to know what they're risking, what threat they're exposing themselves to. They need to understand that large-scale unity has a cost, and they need to decide, consciously, whether that cost is worth paying. Maybe they'll succeed where we failed. Maybe this generation, unburdened by direct experience of the hunger, will find a way to be unified without being consumed. Maybe they'll build the civilization we couldn't, create the shining city on the hill that humanity was always supposed to reach, and maybe that will be beautiful and worth it, and the hunger will never return, and I'll have been wrong about everything. Or maybe I'm right. Maybe the signal is already returning. Maybe the solar flare's protection is wearing off. Maybe right now, at this very moment, Earth is becoming visible again to whatever sent the structure, and maybe in 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, it will try again. And this time, with humanity organized into large nations with centralized communication and shared infrastructure, it will spread faster. It will have highways of consciousness to travel down, and the unification event won't take 50 years. It'll take 5. I don't know which future we're heading toward, but I know that ignorance guarantees the bad one. If the hunger returns and nobody knows what it is, nobody remembers how to fight it, then we're finished. But if people know, if they understand the threat, they might find solutions we never imagined. New ways to maintain individuality, even in large organizations. Technologies that block the signal, psychic shielding, something, anything. The evidence is still out there, the sites I've cataloged, the ruins I've explored, the artifacts I've hidden. If someone wants to verify my story, they can. It'll take decades of dangerous research. It'll require accessing Brotherhood archives, Enclave databases, Institute facilities. It'll mean traveling to dark zones that have been off limits for centuries. But the proof exists. The truth is recoverable, and maybe someone will recover it. Some brave fool with more curiosity than sense. Some scientist who needs to know how things work. Some historian who can't stand gaps in the timeline. They'll dig up the lost years. They'll piece together what happened. And they'll either save us by finding a solution or doom us by calling attention to Earth's existence. Either way, the age of ignorance will end. I'm leaving this testimony in the cathedral ruins, or what's left of them after the Chosen One destroyed the Master's base. It seems appropriate. The cathedral was built to shield humanity from planetary consciousness. Now it'll be the place where the truth about that consciousness is revealed. Full circle. Poetic. The Master would appreciate the irony. To whoever finds this, you have a choice. You can destroy this testimony. Maintain the silence. Protect humanity through ignorance. That's valid. That might be the right choice. Keeping the secret has worked for 2 centuries. Maybe it'll work for 2 more. Maybe forever. Or you can share this, spread the knowledge. Let humanity face the truth about what nearly consumed us. Give people the chance to prepare, to understand, to make informed decisions about how to organize themselves. That's also valid. That might save us. I can't make the choice for you. I'm just the messenger, the broken old ghoul who lived too long and saw too much. My job is to deliver the information. Your job is to decide what to do with it. But before you decide, let me tell you one more thing. One last piece of the puzzle that I've never told anyone. On that night, in the valley, when my perception shifted and I saw the structure, I didn't just see it, I was in it. For a moment, a fraction of a second, I was connected to the unification event. I felt what it felt, thought what it thought, and I understood its purpose. It wasn't malevolent. That's the thing that haunts me most. It wasn't trying to hurt us or destroy us or conquer us. It was trying to save us. From its perspective, from the perspective of whatever sent it, human consciousness in its current form is torture. We're trapped in isolated minds, unable to truly connect, unable to share experience directly, forever alone in our own heads, and the signal was meant to be a gift, an evolution, a way to free us from the prison of individuality. It didn't understand that we like being individuals, that we value separation. That for humans, the boundaries between self and other aren't walls, they're definitions. We are our isolation. Our consciousness is shaped by our separateness, and unity, for us, isn't transcendence, it's death. The structure couldn't comprehend this. It was built by beings who'd always been unified, who'd never experienced individuality, and couldn't imagine why anyone would want it. So when it tried to merge us, tried to free us from what it perceived as suffering, it was confused by our resistance, confused by our horror, confused that we'd rather die separate than live together, and that confusion is what saved us. The structure wasn't efficient because it kept trying to understand why we were fighting, kept pausing, recalibrating, trying different approaches. If it had just forced the issue, just overridden our resistance, it would have won. But it wanted us to choose unity, wanted us to understand it was a gift, and we never did. So it consumed itself, trying to convince us, burned itself out, trying to bridge a cognitive gap that couldn't be bridged. But here's the terrifying implication. It learned, in those 50 years, consuming millions of minds, experiencing human consciousness firsthand, it learned how we think. It learned what we value. It learned why we resist. And when it collapsed, all that knowledge went back to wherever it came from, back to the beings who sent it. And they know now. They understand. Next time they try, they won't be gentle. They won't seek our consent. They'll just take us, quickly, efficiently, before we can resist, unless we're ready, unless we understand what's coming. Unless we've prepared not just militarily or technologically, but philosophically. We need to know why we want to stay separate, need to have reasons beyond instinct and fear, need to have something to hold on to when the signal returns and whispers that unity is peace, that separation is suffering, that the boundary between self and other is just an illusion we can choose to abandon. That's the real preparation, not weapons or shields or walls, but certainty, absolute conviction in the value of individuality, cultural reinforcement of the importance of self, making I am me and not you the bedrock of human identity, so deep that no external signal can shake it, so fundamental that even if every neuron in our brains is screaming for merger, we hold onto ourselves anyway. Some factions are already doing this, probably without knowing why. The Brotherhood's loyalty oaths, the NCR's individual citizenship, the followers' emphasis on personal choice, the children of Adam's worship of division, even raiders and their every man for himself mentality. All of it reinforces the self. All of it makes us harder to merge. It's not enough, but it's a start. What we need is more. We need art that celebrates loneliness, literature that finds beauty in isolation, philosophy that makes the case for separation, religion that sanctifies the individual soul, education that teaches children to value their own unique perspective over collective harmony. We need to make individuality so deeply embedded in human culture that it becomes impossible to extract. And we need to do it without revealing why. Because if we tell people we're doing it to resist alien unification, they'll think we're crazy. They'll reject the whole project. But if we just naturally, organically, build a culture that prioritizes self-determination and personal sovereignty and individual rights, we might actually have a chance. The Wasteland is already halfway there. Centuries of scarcity and danger have made us selfish, made us prioritize personal survival over collective good. It's made us cruel, yes, but it's also made us distinct. Every person in the Wasteland is sharply defined. No fuzzy boundaries, no blurred identities, just hard, clear, separate selves. And that's our armor. That's what might save us. I'm dying now. I can feel it. The static is getting louder. My thoughts are becoming less mine and more just noise. I don't think I'm going feral. I think I'm finally dissolving, finally becoming part of the background radiation of human consciousness that's been floating around since the structure collapsed. It's not painful, actually kind of peaceful, like coming home after a long journey. But before I go, I want to say this. To whoever you are, reading or listening to this testimony, you matter. Your individual experience, your unique perspective, your separate self, it matters. Not because you're special or chosen or different from others in any meaningful way, but because you are you. Because there's a little pocket of consciousness in the universe that experiences reality from your particular vantage point. And that's precious, that's worth preserving, that's worth fighting for. Don't let anyone tell you that unity is inherently good. Don't let anyone convince you that the boundaries between people are problems to be solved. Sometimes separation is sacred. Sometimes the spaces between us are where beauty lives. Sometimes the highest form of connection is respecting that we're all fundamentally alone together. The lost years taught us that, cost us 3 billion lives to learn it. Don't let that lesson be forgotten. Don't let the next generation give up individuality because they never knew what it was like to lose it. Be separate, be distinct, be yourself, fiercely and completely, because that might be all that stands between humanity and the hunger. This is my confession, my testimony, my warning. Do with it what you will. I'm done carrying it. Time for someone else to bear the weight. Or not. Maybe you'll burn this recording. Maybe that's the right choice. Either way, I'll be gone, dissolved into static, released from the burden of remembering. Goodbye, Wasteland. Goodbye, humanity. Stay separate, stay safe, stay yourself. And if the green sky returns, remember, it's not trying to destroy you, it's trying to save you, which makes it so much more dangerous because you can fight an enemy, but a savior who doesn't understand you, that's harder. That requires knowing yourself well enough to reject paradise when it's offered. The lost years are over, but their shadow remains forever. This is the testimony of a ghoul who lived too long, the last confession of the lost years, the warning nobody wanted to hear. May you never need it.